A controversial subject. Yep, it's just gonna be one of those days. Hello guys, welcome, or if you already seen my channel before, welcome back. I'm the Philadelphia Whovian, and for this video, well, it's going to be about something that I've seen some past criticism on, that I am not going to lie, I don't feel the same way. And that is with Classic Who's lack of diversity being a major problem, in the sense that it offends them. And I admit, as you see, am an African-American woman, and despite, as much as I love diversity, I enjoy it a great deal, I admit that the Classic Who's lack of diversity is not something that I personally take offense to, and what I mean by that is, it's something that does not hold me back from loving Classic Who, or makes me think less of Classic Who 4. Long story short, I love casting that does represent me, but it's not a deal breaker. What I mean, again, by that is, I like being represented, very much so, but it's simply that when it comes to classic Doctor Who, the lack of constant multicultural diversity does not dampen my love for it. I hope all of that made sense. I tried to phrase it in every single way I possibly could, and I'm like, I know I probably did not phrase it very well. I hope you get my drift. I really hope you do. And when it comes to people talking about classic Doctor Who not making enough motions to have cultural or racial diversity amongst their cast, it's true that there is not as much cultural, inclusion as there could have been, but I also think it's not really fair of us to judge Classic Who by the standards that we have today, to put our modern day standards on Classic Who and therefore judge it for that and confine it to that and discredit it for that. I don't think is fair unto Classic Who, especially considering the time period that came out in and all of the political problems that were happening at the time. Now, when it comes to that, I'm going to address some things on both sides of the situation, and I will try to respect those who, yes, you're like, feel like the lack of diversity in Classic Who was a little stressful to you. I'm going to, show sympathy towards you, but this is going to be a video about how I still love Classic Who. I still think it's one of my favorite shows of all time, and it probably always will be. So when it comes to Classic Who, it aired in 1963. Now, one of the first arguments for the fact of lack of diversity in Classic Who is that there weren't enough ethnic actors to go around. This I've seen in some documentaries of Doctor Who, when it comes to these special features, there was one guy, he was a Caucasian guy in Britain, a British, white guy. He wrote a book about, black people and ethnic diversity when it came to early, to BBC television. And he said, actually, he's like, that's not entirely true, because 1950s and 60s there was plenty of black talent running around. There very much was. There was black performers, black singers, black dancers, black actors. There was black drama. And so there was representation for that, and there also were black photographers. There was one who worked at Compact. I'm going to assume, if you don't know what that is, just look it up. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, but Compact, there was black photographer. And also in the 1960s, on ITTV, there was one TV show that was very controversial, and I think it was like in 1964, but I could be wrong, but I think it was 1964. I know it was in the 60s, where there was an actress named Joan, I believe, and she played a black doctor, and she had a romantic relationship with a white doctor. Very, very controversial stuff, of course, but this did happen. It was a very bold move to do in Britain in the 1960s. But when it comes to Doctor Who, what you've got is a show that comes out in 1963 where there is still segregation and there is still the problems dealing with immigration. And also, Britain was at a time where it was losing, its empire was slightly contracting and crumbling, and they were losing parts of their empire. Parts of the empire were gaining independence. And this was crippling the British Empire in some ways or many ways. And sometimes it was said from British historians that Britain at that point was becoming, kind of bankrupt. This was a stressful time for people. So when you've got a show for children coming out in the 1960s, when all that's happening in the background, you want to be a hit. You want to please your audience. So you are naturally going to, I feel, probably play it safe when you first get started. But what also has to be remembered is when Doctor Who first aired, it was begun essentially by outsiders. The producer, Verity Lambert, was the first female producer, and the director, the first director they had, he was slightly Indian, like an Anglo-Indian. The term is Anglo-Indian, but I don't know what the politically correct term is nowadays. But he was an Anglo-Indian. So you have that, and then you have Sidney Newman, who was the primary person who helped create Doctor Who. Of course, there are a lot of people who were there behind the scenes helping, of course, and contributing to it, but he was one of the main people who began it, and he is a Canadian. He's not even really, I know Canada and Britain have a lot of connections together, and they are very connected, but Canada is still technically North America. He is technically an American. So you have all these outsiders coming in and contributing to a show, which means Doctor Who already did have cultural diversity, or did have a diverse just simply in the background. It just wasn't the cast that wasn't that diverse, but there was stuff happening in the background. Just wasn't as visible to the audience. But even then, I'm still fine with it, because they wanted to, this is them trying to get a show going. They need to make it popular, and so I feel like Doctor Who, it was just finding its feet. It really was. So it wanted to be a hit, and it wanted to be acceptable unto the populace, and it did become a hit. Now, people are so much focused on the lack of diversity in Classic Who that they don't notice the strong efforts of diversity when it did happen, which it did. And now we're going to go into the progression of the golden era for black actors in the 60s of Doctor Who, and also the BBC. When nearing the end of William Hartnell's run was 1966. Well, at that point, nearing the end of his run, we began to see black actors really be introduced into Doctor Who. I believe it might have been the first one was actually The Smugglers, but I could be wrong there. The second to last story of the first Doctor. Now, that one is mostly missing, so I've not seen it in that story, or it's completely missing. It's probably completely missing. I'm just off there. And he's seen it, but that one had a black character, and that was a caricature, if you will. So some people look at that as like a bad character. Now, or bad representation, or a stereotypical representation of black people. But here's the thing, the very next story, The 10th Planet, has another ethnic actor, a black actor, Bermudan, but he's my skin tone, black, who was in a very respectable and legitimate part, and he had power, and he did have authority. He was giving commands while he was on the plane. He was literally a very good role for a person of color. So for a person of color to be a respectable character after a person of color was a disreputable character, I don't really feel the pain of the disreputable character, because it's just showing to me that you're just having black people be anywhere. They could be villains or heroes. So I can't be mad at them for being, the caricature of a black person in The Smugglers, when the very next story has a black person in a very sophisticated and noble role. It's obvious they're just putting black people wherever that black person is going to do a good job in, which is fine. So we have that going into the Patrick Troughton era. The first, or one of the two main eras that did its best to showcase people of color, as and try to gradually show them to the point where it gave them it was going to give them more consistency of appearance in Doctor Who. And one of the two eras was the Patrick Troughton era. We first get Power of the Daleks, yes, but then we eventually get to the moon base, where there is a black actor, if we can believe the animation, who is on the moon base. He's very articulate, he's a part of the crew, and he clearly is there because he has some sort of skill. He gets infected very quickly by the disease the Cybermen have put into the sugar, but that's not against him. There was a white character even before him who got sick even before that. That's just, part of the direction, and not part of the direction, part of the storytelling. It's not because he's black that he got, sick really quickly. That's all the characters got sick, and they're, not all the characters, but it didn't depend on you being black for you to get, shafted to the sick bay very soon in. That happened to white characters too. But it was still a black actor who was there and was a respectable character. Then we get down to Evil of the Daleks. In Evil of the Daleks, again, we have another character of ethnic diversity pretty much sprinkled throughout Evil of the Daleks. But because the story is mostly all missing, that gets often forgotten about. Then you have the second season, you got Tomb of the Cybermen, where the character is Toberman. Now, Toberman gets called out for racial stereotypes or racial this or this, but what often people, I understand why you feel that way, but Toberman was the ultimate hero by the end of it, and one of the last shots was on Toberman's body as he's lying dead. Toberman was taken over by the Cybermen, but he rose above the hypnosis they put him on, and he did ultimately defeat them. He did sacrifice his own life to solve the problem, meaning Toberman is the ultimate hero here. The very first story of the second season, and Toberman is technically the hero. And yes, he does not speak very much at all. He might even have a mental disability, but as a person who's worked with actors before, actors love characters where they can sometimes love characters where it's all about the physicality of their character and less about the dialogue. You can be if your character is very physically engaging, actors sometimes like that and like a break because they get to show their performance through movement. And Toberman, the actor they got to play him, I don't think I want to see any other actor who played Toberman because he brought such dignity to the role with his movement and his behavior and his feeling. So you can say it's stereotypical, and I understand why you do, or it's just racial profiling. I don't know what it is. You can agree. You do have a point there. I'm not lying to you about this, and I admit that I'm not going to act like you do not have a point. You do have a point. But Toberman, to me, marked the beginning of having a black character consistently all throughout a story. But you're doing it by baby steps. And I feel like if Toberman were played by a white guy, nobody would have said anything about it. But he's played by a black guy, so now it's, of course, stereotypical and a little derogatory. But I'm not sure. I have no way of knowing that. No way of knowing if I'm right with that theory. I'm just, saying that this is what when you want to kind of introduce a change, it's best to do it gradually sometimes, because people sometimes react to change that when it's very abrupt change, like, oh God, what the hell, because it shocks us, it sometimes scares us. It's like Emily Dickinson's Emily Dickinson's poem, sorry, tongue-tied. Emily Dickinson's poem, Tell All the Truth But Tell It Slant. She basically has a poem that sums up Plato's The Cave very well. I don't know if she was thinking of Plato's The Cave when she wrote it, but the idea of if you tell the truth really quickly, it can blind someone. But if you tell it gradually and tell it in stints, or you expose people to things gradually, they become able to withstand it and adapt to it and accept the change. Abrupt change is too swift of a change. Sometimes. Sometimes it can knock people off kilter. I could be wrong, just a theory. But with Toberman, it's the same thing goes with, black actors. We got, the Smugglers and the 10th Planet, then the Moon Base, Evil Daleks, and now Toberman. They are gradually trying to show, put black people into the mold gradually, so that when it happens more, you get used to it at this point and they can just go full throttle with it. And also, they have to deal with the reality that they're taking risks here. Because there is, again, immigration, there is still segregation happening in the world at this time. Doctor Who was in a world that was dealing with a lot of racial injustice and gender injustice, and it was trying to cope in the world around it, while having a lot of things to say about the world that it was talking about. This is Doctor Who for you. The world it was in at the time. And we have to take into account the world it was in at the time. And that's part 1 of this video. I will upload the next video very soon. I just don't want these to go on too long this time, so I'm trying to get better about that. So, I shall see you again very soon, guys. I promise! Swear. Cross my hearts.